He was a Pentagon insider, a veteran, an investigator, and today he's quite possibly the most important voice in the modern UFO movement.
I'm doing nothing more than finishing the job I was given.
Lou Elizondo risking his career, his family, and possibly his life to tell the story of what the American government really knows about alien craft.
And it's responsive and reactive.
Alien life.
There's zero information to suggest what they are doing is for benevolent reasons.
And the people in the Pentagon trying to hide the truth from you. There are forces, powerful forces, that don't want this story told.
And they'll go to great lengths to keep it a secret.
If aliens exist, where do they come from?
You know, people always say, well, these things are clearly from outer space. And I say, let's hold off on that.
What have they done to people?
Some of these people were very seriously injured.
And what do they want?
Hopefully they're not like us.
Tonight, you'll hear the jaw-dropping revelations.
I'm not saying it doesn't sound crazy. What I'm saying is it's real.
Lou Elizondo, Confessions of a UFO Hunter.
Unidentified anomalous phenomena.
Making more information public when it comes to unidentified anomalous phenomenon.
This object and mysterious ring that appeared over the skies of Oklahoma earlier this month.
Unless you've been asleep for the past 7 years, you've probably noticed our species is living through a UFO renaissance. Headlines, television specials, incident reports, and even congressional hearings into what are now called UAPs, unidentified anomalous phenomena.
We have things flying over military installations and no one knows what it is.
There are many people responsible for this resurgence of interest, but perhaps no one has played a bigger role than a muscle-bound man with tattoos, a soul patch, and one hell of a story to tell. He's Lou Elizondo, former Pentagon UFO investigator, and he's telling that story here on NewsNation, and in a new book. Its tantalising title, Imminent, Inside the Pentagon's Hunt for UFOs. Your book title is Imminent. Something is about to happen. What's about to happen?
Well, if we're lucky, disclosure. The realization that the U.S. government is aware that the topic of UAPs is not only valid, but they're real.
The book lays out in vivid detail allegations that the United States military has been running a UAP retrieval and reverse engineering program for years and has even recovered alien bodies. Aliens, non-human intelligences, are real and they have been engaging with humanity.
Ross, we're not alone. We are not alone in this universe, and it is a simple fact. And the U.S. government has been aware of that fact now for decades.
The American public, the entire planet, is being lied to by the American government about what's really going on.
I think if the American public knew just how deep this lie went, that we would have a very significant constitutional crisis on our hands.
Why should you believe any of this? And who is this Elizondo character anyway? Well, it depends on whom you ask.
Very hardworking, very diligent, intelligent, and patriotic.
He is just a normal guy who is trying to do something extraordinary.
What defines Lou Elizondo?
Loyalty, transparency, honesty.
Officially, the Pentagon disputes what Elizondo says he's done and seen. But everyone agrees he's an Army veteran who has served in hotspots around the world, then oversaw counter-espionage and counter-terrorism investigations for the Department of Defense. In short, he's an American badass. You've been in combat situations, haven't you? You've been in life-threatening situations.
I've been in some very unfortunate situations, yeah. I've got a lot of regrets, and I want to make sure that whatever I've done in my life, serving the people in that building, I don't want to forget, even the bad things.
To make sense of the man and his claims, you need to go back to when it all started. That was 2009, when Elizondo was working as an intelligence operations specialist for the Department of Defense. He'd risen to the coveted GS-15 pay scale, the highest level federal employees can attain.
Remember, I was a senior GS-15 at the time, which is, pretty senior.
What's more, he'd set up a comfortable life in Kent Island, Maryland, with his wife Jen and their 2 daughters.
We had a really nice place to live. This was a great place to raise our kids, and it was just a really laid-back area to grow up, to raise a family and to live here.
But Elizondo says it all changed after he met this man, a renowned missile systems expert named Jim Lekatsky. He was running a program called OSAP.
He was running a program called OSAP, correct.
Which I have to read the acronym. It's the Advanced Aerospace Weapons System Application Program. But you learned soon that what OSAP was investigating was not just advanced weaponry.
Yeah, I remember distinctly Jim pulling me into his office. He said, just bluntly, he said, "What do you think about UFOs?" And so I responded truthfully. I said, "I don't." I wasn't interested particularly as a kid into science fiction. I wasn't a big Star Trek fan or Star Wars fan. So I consider myself kind of a gumshoe investigator, old school, just the facts, ma'am kind of guy. And he said, "That's fair, but," he said, "make sure that you don't let your analytic bias get the best of you, and you have to remain open-minded."
He basically told you UFOs, unidentified anomalous phenomena, UAPs, are real.
Yeah, so Jim told me point blank that they were studying and collecting information on UFOs.
Elizondo claims he was invited to join a program under the OSAP umbrella called ATIP, the Advanced Aerospace Threat Identification Program. And soon that invitation became an initiation.
Oh, it was a bit of like Alice in Wonderland going down the rabbit hole. And it kept getting deeper and deeper.
Elizondo says his first real epiphany came during a meeting with a Brazilian Air Force general who'd come to brief them on a series of incidents in a city called Colares. Tell me what was happening.
These people, the townspeople, were being plagued by UFOs. In some cases, they were being pursued, and reports of these laser beam type, if you will, emissions were coming down and harming people to the point where the Brazilian government actually deployed doctors and the military to investigate. And then when they arrived, they substantiated. They encountered these UFOs, these UAP as well.
But Lou, I know the report of Colares. Officially, according to the Brazilian government, Colares didn't find any evidence at all.
Yeah. Well, that was not the case, and it was very clear that it was a very legitimate investigation, and what they found was that these things were coming in and out of the area and harming people.
As Lou went further down the rabbit hole, he says he learned that many of the classic UFO cases were in fact much more than legends, including the famous incident in Roswell, New Mexico. Roswell, 1947. What happened?
There was a UAP that crashed. In fact, there were 2 UAP that crashed, and one flew away while the other one did not, and it was recovered by the U.S. government.
You must appreciate people watching this, hearing you talking about aliens, recovered craft, recovered bodies. It sounds crazy.
Well, as I've said before, I'm not saying it doesn't sound crazy. What I'm saying is it's real.
Coming up, are alien abductions real? So people have been taken away from their homes and had things planted in them. Is there a connection between aliens and psychic powers?
This is real morphology occurring in the human brain.
And what happened when Lou started bringing his work home with him?
I had no idea what the hell I was getting myself into.
Stay with us. Former Pentagon UFO investigator Lou Elizondo writes in his new book, Imminent, that non-human intelligence has been engaging with humans for decades. So what do they want? There are many commentators who say they're friendly. They're no threat at all to humanity. Can we assume that?
Well, I think in order to understand if something is a threat, from a national security perspective, it's a very simple calculus. It's capabilities versus intent. we see some of the capabilities, and by the way, we can't replicate them. We have no idea the intent. So to presume or to assume that these things are friendly or they're hostile, there's not enough data.
Elizondo says the Pentagon's UFO investigators were keenly interested in the impact UAPs were having on individuals, especially military personnel.
There's enough reports that substantiate that not all these interactions are necessarily benign or peaceful. Some people leave terrified, some people leave injured. There are U.S. service people. There is people that are on full 100% disability right now from the U.S. government because of an interaction with UAP. And it's in writing, by the way, from the U.S. government because of their involvement in an incident.
Indeed, the Veterans Administration has granted full medical disability benefits to this man, Airman John Burroughs, for injuries to his heart and eyes he claims he suffered during the famous 1980 UAP incident in Rendlesham Forest, England. And Elizondo says that's just the tip of the iceberg. Did you, in any of your UAP investigations, come across evidence of alleged abductions of humans by non-human beings?
We came across information that suggested that people were having things put inside their body that they did not give approval to.
So people have been taken away from their homes in the middle of the night and had things planted in them.
Something that was put inside their body, something invasive, right? Something that was not put there by their permission to do something.
You've seen one of those implants, haven't you?
I have been privy to some very interesting things.
This photo, he says, shows one of those interesting things. It's allegedly a biological sample removed from a US service member and submitted for analysis. This is possibly an alien implant.
Well, if you look, there's actually a piece of the chip sticking out and what appears to be these fibers that were moving on their own. And then it looks like this chip or whatever this is, this foreign object, is encapsulated by some sort of biological material.
Could that not be something biological, microbiological, or parasitic?
Well, it certainly, the outside looks like it's some sort of masking device. In essence, you have a foreign object, which it's a metallic object in there, and it seems to be encapsulated by some sort of biological material.
But how do you know it's not just a bit of metal that somebody's knocked into on a building site?
Well, in this particular case, this was moving on its own. It was actually had its own metabolic activity, and it terrified. One of the doctors who was looking at this under a microscope said they didn't want to see this again.
But are UAPs abducting people at random, or are they drawn to certain individuals? Elizondo says research has revealed an intriguing pattern among UAP experiences in a fascinating part of the brain.
This is a part of the brain known as the quadrate putamen, and it is a very specific part of the brain. It's responsible for all sorts of stuff, and some have even speculated precognition
But certainly intuition.
Intuition for sure.
Elizondo says the caudate putamen is larger in people with alleged psychic powers, what the government has called remote viewing. What about people who've had UAP experiences?
Very interesting. The same thing. And by the way, that's not me telling you. These are medical doctors and scientists.
Stanford immunologist Dr. Gary Nolan has been researching this topic, and while his conclusions are not definitive, there are two working theories. One, that people with naturally large caudate putamen might attract UAPs like an antenna. Another, that UAP encounters with normal people cause that same part of the brain to get bigger.
And there is a lot of information to substantiate that this is real morphology occurring in the human brain.
Elizondo argues that people with enhanced caudate putamen might have a talent both for remote viewing and communicating with UAPs. And that's important because it's an established fact that the Pentagon has had an interest in remote viewing for military purposes.
In the vernacular, they used to call it psychic espionage. There was a program in the U.S. government, it's called Stargate. They were taking young soldiers and civilians and they were training them to conduct espionage behind enemy lines. And the term was called remote viewing. A lot of people that were in the remote viewing program had MRIs done of their brains, and a vast majority have that specific morphology. Do I think it's extraordinary? No, it may be a vestigial capability that humans had for a long time.
But does it work?
Oh, it absolutely works. It absolutely works.
You see, remote viewing has been discredited. The CIA determined that it doesn't work.
Okay, sure.
You're saying it does work?
It absolutely works.
Lou says he knows it works because he was trained in remote viewing himself.
I don't like to really publicly talk about it. My involvement was only tangential.
There's a story you tell of a terrorist suspect, and there was a remote viewing operation done that you were part of.
Yes, we did an experiment. Probably shouldn't have, but we did. And long story short, it appeared to be very effective.
That alleged capability for remote viewing and its potential connection to non-human intelligence may sound like a gift. But Lou says it was also, at least partially, a curse. He says that's because after years of studying UAP encounters, he began experiencing what's known in UAP circles as the hitchhiker effect. UAPs were appearing at his home, perhaps because he was attracting them. What started happening?
Oh, wow. Where do I start? Well, we would have these weird glowing balls of light in the house. They were green, they were small, they were diffuse, kind of like a little neon ball, and it really caused some disruption for my kids and my wife.
What were you seeing?
I would routinely see orbs.
What do you mean by orbs?
Small little spherical green, lightish green type of color. And I'd be just walking down the hall and I would just stop and it would just continue to go right through the wall.
So we're talking about the hitchhiker effect. Something had followed Lou home from work.
Or by his very nature, yes.
How did he explain things? Was he able to talk about what was going on?
Not well.
I could imagine you were pretty angry.
I was very upset. The house had been turned upside down.
Yes, it sounds like the stuff of madness, tall tales, delusions. And anyway, where was the proof for any of this? But before Elizondo was through, the world would see it on video.
There's a whole fleet of them. Look on the ASA. My gosh.
Stay with us. This is the video that would shock the world and change it.
2004 in November, the USS Nimitz carrier strike group were doing what they call workups off the coast of San Diego. And as they are doing this, there are two different radar arrays that are picking up these objects over the course of several days, dropping from 80,000 feet and within about a second or less, all of a sudden being 50 feet over the water and hovering and then popping back up again. So they vector the two F-18 aircraft and they go to look at this thing. And long story short, after visually seeing this tic-tac looking object, roughly about the same length of a F-18 fuselage, performing in ways that we still can't replicate, bouncing around up and down.
So this is an intelligent technology.
This is absolutely, and it's responsive and reactive.
And it's not human.
It's not ours.
Though the Nimitz tic-tac incident had occurred back in 2004, Elizondo didn't see the video until 2009. And then in 2015, it happened again.
Look at that thing, dude.
Naval aviators attached to the USS Roosevelt recorded these two other videos during exercises off the coast of Florida. That also caught the attention of intelligence consultant and former Deputy Assistant Secretary of Defense, Chris Mellon.
The Navy was experiencing a number of incursions into restricted airspace, and I met Lou at the Pentagon, began to hear about these incursions, And the more I learned, the more I realized that we had a potential disaster on our hands.
The videos remained undisclosed to the public for years, and it's easy to see why. These weren't just strange objects in the sky. They conformed to what ATIP would establish as the 5 observables.
My gosh.
So the 5 observables include instantaneous acceleration, hypersonic velocity, low observability, trans-medium travel, and anti-gravity. In essence, the ability to defy Earth's natural gravitational force without the associated technology or means to do it. The government has said that for the record. This is not our technology. You know, people always say, well, Lou, you know, these things are clearly from outer space. And I say, well, you know, let's hold off on that. I often tell people, look, they can be from outer space, inner space, or frankly, the space in between. There's a whole reality around us. There's life in the bottom of the ocean that live and thrive, and they survive off chemosynthesis, not the sun. And then we have life that's, you know, deep down in the Arctic ice that's thriving, and even on the ISS space station.
What do you find, though, the most plausible explanation for the intelligence that we're witnessing?
I mean, these things could be just as natural as we are. They could be from the oceans. We don't know.
Elizondo says ATIP also identified another pattern. In several instances, UAPs have allegedly appeared near American nuclear facilities or weapons systems. Both the Nimitz and the Roosevelt are nuclear-powered.
We do know that there is a very significant interest that UAP have towards our nuclear technology.
A daunting thought, to be sure. But Elizondo says ATIP also developed a hypothesis that the UAPs might have an Achilles heel, a vulnerability that the American military can exploit. Electromagnetic pulses of some kind could bring down these craft.
Yeah, the general consensus was that these vehicles, the propulsion units, are susceptible to electromagnetic pulse, meaning they are using a technology that the electromagnetism, if they were to encounter a certain frequency of electromagnetism, would interfere with their ability to fly and maneuver.
Building on that hypothesis, Elizondo says his team devised an audacious secret plan to disable and capture one of those Tic Tacs.
We had proposed a honey trap to try to collect data and information on these UAP.
So this was an operation known as Interloper.
That is correct. So you have a nuclear-powered carrier with other nuclear-powered vessels, potentially nuclear-powered submarines, which also may have potentially nuclear weapons. So the idea is to create a nuclear footprint that is so irresistible to these things. We would create a trap, and then that trap would be sprung.
But Operation Interloper never made it past the planning phase. Interloper was stymied, wasn't it? It was scrapped.
It was scrapped.
It was a pretty good idea.
And it was approved by a lot of people and a lot of agencies.
And yet, when it finally got to the top, it was stopped. It was blocked. It's almost like somebody perhaps already knew the answer.
Or didn't want us having the answer.
Elizondo says the shelving of Operation Interloper was just one of several puzzling and frustrating setbacks to ATIP's mission. And eventually he came to believe it was more than just bureaucratic inefficiency. Someone was trying to block his team from making progress.
I took an oath to the American people to defend this country from all enemies, foreign and domestic, and it turns out that the enemy was elements in our own government. It was the bureaucracy.
That realization would lead to the biggest and riskiest decision of Elizondo's life.
Accomplish my mission, I knew I had to leave.
Stay with us. If it's true that the Pentagon's so-called legacy program has been secretly retrieving and studying non-human craft and even bodies, well, where are they? Area 51, Wright-Patterson Air Force Base in Ohio, or somewhere else? No one has come forward with those specifics. Not even famed military intelligence officer turned UFO whistleblower David Grush, who went public on NewsNation last year.
Those details were not approved for me to talk about.
But now, Lou Elizondo is going there. There comes a point in your book where you name names. You name Lockheed Martin, TRW, Northrop Grumman, Boeing, Raytheon, BAE Systems, and the Aerospace Corporation as being some of the private corporations that are involved in working on retrieved alien technology. True?
It is true that it is in my book. Yep.
You also reveal how some non-human, alien biosamples are now being kept at Fort Detrick in Maryland, or with the FDA, and that they've been moved around so many times their origins have likely been forgotten. Elizondo claims that some of the answers, and perhaps the biological samples, can be found here at the Department of Health and Human Services, which oversees the FDA and the NIH.
Certainly we know that a lot of these samples were farmed out to experts like the National Institute of Health, NIH, and the U.S. Food and Drug Administration, which absolutely fall under the authorities of this building. Logically, it makes sense that there are people in that building right now that may know the location of where these biological samples are.
The defence companies Elizondo names, the Pentagon and the Department of Health and Human Services, all categorically deny Elizondo's claims. He says those denials are only possible because he could never get the evidence to prove their involvement once and for all. Your investigations wanted to investigate those samples and you were denied access.
We were, yeah.
You became increasingly aware, didn't you, that there were people in the Pentagon, in the intelligence community, in private aerospace, who didn't want you investigating UAPs.
Absolutely. We began to run into some fierce resistance. And the more we continued to investigate, the increased level of that resistance became. There were elements, the only way I can describe them as religious fundamentalists.
It's a group that is euphemistically dubbed as the Collins elite, isn't it?
It is.
The Collins elite has long been rumoured to be a cabal of religious fanatics within the Pentagon. Many consider them a myth. Elizondo thinks otherwise.
That group is alive and well. It exists. I encountered elements of that group firsthand.
And they're gatekeepers inside the Pentagon who don't want the UAP story investigated.
That is correct, Ross. There are religious fundamentalists inside the Pentagon and inside the U.S. government, and specifically the intelligence community, that have a very, how shall I say, strict interpretation of their philosophical belief system.
Elizondo recounts one specific encounter with a high-ranking member of this so-called Collins elite.
He stopped me in the halls at the Pentagon. He said, "Have you read your Bible lately?" And I was kind of surprised by the question. Like, I mean, I know what the Bible says. What, may I ask specifically, what do you mean? He says, and you know what we're dealing with are demons. These are demonic beings, and we shouldn't be looking at them.
But aside from potential religious motivations for the secrecy, Elizondo suggests there could also be geopolitical considerations at play. Do the Russians and the Chinese have recovered craft?
I can't speak on behalf of what the Russians or Chinese or any adversaries may have or may not have.
Well, could that be driving our concern that we don't want to show our hand?
There's always a concern when a foreign adversary is looking at something. There is this cat and mouse. We don't want the adversaries to know what we have, and we also don't want the adversaries to know what we don't know, right? So there's always a reason not to broadcast what you know and don't know to your enemy.
Whatever the motivations for the alleged cover-up, Elizondo says it went way beyond mere bureaucratic foot-dragging. People were threatened, weren't they?
Oh, absolutely. Some of our folks were told, if you're not careful, we're going to do exactly to you what we did with the Rosenbergs. You're done.
So people are being threatened with death if they talk about this?
Sure, because, and by the way, people say, oh, the government would never do that. Try getting on Area 51. There's signs on the fence that say lethal force is authorized. You absolutely can use lethal force to protect national security investments and equities. That, we do it.
Elizondo describes the mounting obstructions, the denied requests, the scrapped plans, the threats, and above all, the steadfast refusal to disclose any of this, either to the public, the Congress, or even the President. By early 2017, it had all become too much. So there came a time during your work with ATIP where you just decided, I'm getting nowhere, I'm getting blocked, I'm getting stymied. What did you decide to do?
I went public. I resigned.
How hard was it for you to write this letter?
Oh. Yeah, this letter is my resignation memo to the Secretary of Defense. Probably the hardest memo I ever had to write.
In the letter addressed to Defence Secretary James Mattis, Elizondo said he was quitting because, despite overwhelming evidence, certain individuals in the department remain staunchly opposed to further research on the controversial topic of anomalous aerospace threats. Because you wrote that memo and circumvented your immediate bosses,
yeah.
What did they do?
Well, they made my life hell.
Hard times were ahead, but Elizondo was about to make some hell of his own, as he and those explosive videos were about to go public.
I'm doing this because I believe it's the right thing to do.
Stay with us. On December the 16th, 2017, the world woke up to a bombshell. Lou Elizondo, working with Chris Mellon, had gone public with the now famous Nimitz Tic Tac video.
I contacted 3 different news organizations, and eventually the New York Times editors were persuaded they had enough to do a front-page story.
The New York Times published an explosive article revealing the Pentagon's secretive UFO program.
Reports the U.S. government is still collecting information about encounters between unknown aircraft and our military.
Elizondo spent 10 years as head of a secret study of unidentified aerial objects.
When the story broke, this covert operator who'd worked in the world of intelligence suddenly became an international public figure. What was it like?
It was terrifying. I had spent my entire life living in the shadows. As an intelligence officer, anonymity is your friend. Coming out was for me one of the most difficult experiences.
Suddenly, Lou Elizondo's face became synonymous with the UFO question. And now, with his days at the Pentagon behind him, Lou devoted himself to the cause. He took a job with To the Stars Academy, a UFO research and advocacy group founded by rock star Tom DeLonge. Together, they appeared on History Channel's Unidentified, Inside America's UFO investigation, which garnered him even more fame. Someone even started selling t-shirts with his face, but that attention came at a price. There were a lot of positives, but things also were about to get bad, weren't they?
I did not think that our lives would be this turned inside out for this many years. It's exhausting. It's exhausting.
You suffered retribution, and in fact the Office of Special Investigations in the Air Force began a criminal investigation against you, didn't they?
They did.
What happened with that?
The initial allegation was that I was responsible for unauthorized disclosure, and then I stole classified videos out of the Pentagon and a whole bunch of stuff. And long story short, the Air Force OSI came back and said, nope, actually we seized the computers, there's no wrongdoing, didn't take anything home, and he never had a conversation about anything classified. Everything's unclassified.
Publicly, the Pentagon has also denied Lou's claim that he was the head of ATIP, both in prior public statements and directly to NewsNation for this report, effectively calling him a liar and a fraud.
Take ISIS, I'll take Al-Qaeda, whatever. Those don't scare me. Those don't bother me. What bothers me is when people question my loyalty, my intentions of what I'm trying to do. That cuts deep.
What do you think yourself of the fact that the Pentagon, as you describe it, has been actively trying to discredit Lou?
I think it's shameful. This is how you're repaid. It makes no sense to me. It makes no sense.
We need to have an intelligence community that is willing to speak truth to power. Here comes a guy who does that and clearly is correct. Does he get an award for identifying a huge, major vulnerability in America's air defense like he should? No, he gets harassed by these bureaucrats because he's doing stuff that is inconvenient.
On top of the reputational attacks, Lou and his family were uprooted from their home. as Lou's new job at To the Stars Academy called him to California. Then the job fell through. You'd essentially gone from fairly steady jobs, well paid in Maryland, and you'd basically taken a complete financial bath.
I had to get a job at Target, and then after that I got a job at Home Depot.
The family went from their house in Maryland to this mobile home. Does it frustrate you sometimes that people perhaps don't understand the sacrifice that you and Lou and your family have had to endure?
Yeah, especially because everyone thinks we have all this money. Oh, they're just grifting. Come live for a day in my life. I guarantee you will run back to yours.
Why is this worth it, Lou? I mean, you were a GS-15 in the senior executive service of the Defence Department. You ended up having to dig your own pit toilet. You couldn't continue to pay your rent. Why is it worth it?
I have 2 daughters and I have a wife, and we have been through hell. But there's a lot of people who had a lot worse than me. I feel terrible because the stress I have put my family through and what they've had to endure.
Some relief finally came in April 2021, when Senator Harry Reid wrote a letter confirming Lou's role in ATIP.
It's in black and white.
Personal vindication aside, Elizondo says he's most proud of the momentous shift that's taken place in the national conversation on the UAP question, both among the general public and on Capitol Hill. In 2022, lawmakers passed legislation that called on the DoD to create a UAP office which would report to Congress. That office is now known as the All-Domain Anomaly Resolution Office, or ARROW. You have come a long way since 2017. What's been achieved?
I'm most proud of the fact it's being openly discussed in the halls of the Pentagon. That means that the stigma, the taboo, is finally evaporating, and we can begin to see the topic more clearly.
Unidentified objects in any domain pose potential risks to safety and security, particularly from military personnel and capabilities.
With the testimony of the first ARROW director, Sean Kirkpatrick, in 2023, it seemed like the UAP renaissance had officially commenced. But would it really be an age of enlightenment?
What he was saying is not consistent with the truth. And when someone like that blatantly tells you something that is not true, you've got a serious credibility problem.
Stay with us.
Do you solemnly swear or affirm that the testimony you are about to give is the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
On the 26th of July 2023, Navy pilot Ryan Graves, Navy Commander David Fravor, and former Air Force Intelligence Officer David Grush testified at a congressional hearing heard around the world.
I was informed in the course of my official duties of a multi-decade UAP crash retrieval and reverse engineering program.
How did it feel for you, that moment?
It was a very profound and proud moment for me. So you had 3 military personnel testifying on the reality of UAP. Now that's historic.
Whistleblower David Grush came on NewsNation and made an earth-shattering claim.
It felt, for a moment, like the dam was breaking, that full disclosure was about to happen.
The American people deserve to know the truth on this.
But it didn't work out like that. First, ARROW denied David Grush's claims. Then, like Lou, Grush became the subject of a vicious discrediting campaign, including his own medical history.
And they try to discredit him, just like they try to do me, just like they try to do anybody else who comes out and steps out of rank.
What's more, ARROW has publicly declared that it has found no evidence to support any claims of a government UAP retrieval program. As for the UAP captured on those famous videos, yes, they remain unidentified. But while the Pentagon says ARROW will follow the data wherever it leads, it says it has not found any credible evidence of extraterrestrial activity. So do you think that people like Sean Kirkpatrick are operating according to a dictated agenda, that they're being told to try and suppress interest in the UAP?
What I can tell you is that what he was saying is not consistent with the truth. And when someone like that blatantly tells you something that is not true, you've got a serious credibility problem.
Dr. Kirkpatrick told NewsNation, "At no time did I provide false information to Congress. In fact, my team provided actual evidence, something that all of the other claimants have failed to do." Why haven't you appeared before Congress yet? There must have been numerous opportunities.
Well, sure, but there's only been one public hearing so far. There's going to be more, and it's not up to me, but I can tell you I've been asked, and my response was absolutely, I will testify.
Lou's a patriot, isn't he?
Yes.
What's driving him?
He feels that humanity is owed this information. People should know if we are not alone, no government has the right to keep that hidden.
A growing public movement seems to agree, as interest in the UAP question continues to intensify, both online and at UAP conferences around the country. Plus, there's been a veritable avalanche of former military officers coming forward with similar claims, including Rear Admiral Tim Gallaudet and Colonel Cal Nell.
Non-human intelligence exists. Non-human intelligence has been interacting with humanity. This interaction is not new.
And military-grade UAP videos are now popping up regularly, like this one over Puerto Rico, this one along the Arizona border, and this one over an undisclosed conflict zone in the Middle East.
This is more than intriguing, more than provocative. It's potentially revolutionary and transformational.
What can people do? What should any citizen do? How can they help you?
Get involved. Talk to your members of Congress. Ask questions, whether it's around the dinner table or the water cooler. That's what I would encourage people to do. Start asking the hard questions.
So Lou Elizondo, crystal ball. Let's go 1-2 years in the future. Are we going to be as much in the dark then as we are now?
No, but you know, disclosure isn't a sprint. It's a marathon. It's not going to happen overnight. Disclosure isn't an event, it's a process. I think this next generation, if our kids are any indicator of hope, that's where real disclosure is going to occur.
Hello and welcome back to Reality Check. I'm Ross Coulthart. Now, you might cast your mind back 3 weeks ago, where I suspect we came a lot closer to the possibility of a conflagration in the Middle East than even sober commentators care to admit. We were on the brink of possible all-out war. It's a horrible thought, and it's one that the world has lived with since the development of the nuclear weapons that we now use as part of our strategic nuclear deterrence. But that poses other threats. It poses the very real possibility that those weapons might be misused. And since 1967, there's been a treaty in place called the Outer Space Treaty that has forbidden the use of nuclear weapons in space. Now, two former very senior generals from the US Air Force have come forward and written an op-ed piece in our sister publication, The Hill, warning of what they say is the menace the US confronts from space. Those two generals were General Retired John E. Hyten and Major General Roger Teague. Now, unfortunately, General Hyten can't be with us today, but Major General Roger Teague is joining us today. And he is a person who's served in extremely important roles in the US Air Force. In his last US Air Force role, he was the Director of Space Programs for the Office of the Assistant Secretary for Acquisition in Washington, D.C. And sir, I'm hoping we can start this conversation by you telling me what is the threat from space? Why is there a problem with what's called the Satellite Control Network, the SCN?
You bet, Ross. Well, first, let me thank you for having the chance to tell this story and get the word out, because space at its core is so foundational and so fundamental to our everyday lives today. It underpins and is a huge part of the way we conduct our lives each and every day. things as simple as a banking transaction to ensure it has the precise timing associated with that transaction, to the way we navigate using our various means to get around it as we go to and from, to frankly the system of the constellation of missile warning satellites that protect us from ballistic missile attack. There are so many pieces of space and systems in space that are, again, foundational to what we do. And it's critical that we pay attention to and are be mindful of the threats that are out there that might pose any nefarious activity or, as we wrote about in the article, menacing activity that becomes troubling, and before you know it, it gets out of hand, and all of those threat and those resources could be threatened and ultimately taken out.
So back in February this year, Ohio Congressman Mike Turner, who's the Republican chair of the House Intelligence Committee, went public with a very unusual and quite alarming national security warning. He raised evidence that there was an allegation that the US had warned Congress and allies in Europe that the Russians could potentially use a space-based nuclear weapon against the West and its satellites. Now, as we understand it from what I've read, we don't know a lot about this weapon, even whether it actually exists. And a lot of the story is still wrapped up in top secret red tape. But clearly, threatening satellites is a grave threat to communications, as you say, surveillance, intelligence gathering, navigation, command and control. What evidence is there of the existence of such weapons? What's the past history of such threats to our satellites?
Well, I think, Ross, many of those instances have been well documented over the past 10 years or so, even 15 years. We first noticed when I was still in uniform back in 2007, the Chinese blowing up one of their defunct weather satellites that was in orbit as a show of power, as a demonstration of capability. And we've seen since the opening of the Ukrainian war, the Ukrainian conflict, the Russians do the exact same thing. And so it's clear that they're not only firing a shot across the bow, but they're also speaking very loudly with regard to potential intent and demonstrating that they have the ability and the will to, that if provoked or if they felt like that that step needed to be taken, that those steps could be taken. And so it's a capability that we have to be very mindful of. And it's very, it's unsettling. And it is not consistent with the 1967 treaty that you mentioned earlier. And it's something that we should be talking about.
So let's go through what the Russians did at the very beginning of the war. In November 2021, a few months before the Ukrainian invasion, they launched an anti-satellite missile and destroyed one of their own satellites, which filled the surrounding orbit with debris that'll last for decades. And I know how much of a problem the debris is, sir, because I live in Australia. And as you would know, we've helped America install essentially debris monitoring surveillance systems in the far top northwest of Australia to try and monitor and keep tabs of the level of space debris that's up there. How big a problem is what the Russians and the Chinese have been doing?
Well, at its core, it's irresponsible use of space. They know the debris that it's going to create multiple times, and I would refer you to the experts with regard to the number of maneuvers that, as an example, the International Space Station, a peaceful platform, had to maneuver in order to avoid floating debris, orbiting debris. And it's a real problem, not only for the platforms like the space station, but any satellite operator operating in any of those regimes is subject to and has to plan around, and or our launch service providers have to find windows to launch through to make sure that they don't, in fact, that their rockets don't collide with debris. And so it's a very difficult problem that only exacerbates itself every time a demonstration of capability takes place like that, it just makes the problem much worse. And I think the real problem is that a lot of that debris will, if you will, live on orbit for decades. It takes many, many years for it to deorbit and ultimately re-enter the atmosphere and burn up. And so it's a real menacing problem that's going to take a while now. And we're going to ultimately have to plan around in order to continue to have success and safety in space.
So I really want to get into the specifics of what the Russians have been doing, because it is quite sinister. They've tested our readiness, haven't they? They from July 2017 to December 2020, a Russian satellite, you write, alternatively known as Luk or Olympic K or Olymp K, made a series of belligerent orbital maneuvers after reaching its intended position on 16 different occasions, even squeezing itself directly between two operational Intelsat, those are communications, commercial satellites. And then General John Raymond, one of your former colleagues at Space Operations, US Space Force, he publicly acknowledged that a Russian satellite had repositioned its orbit very close to a US national security satellite. And he noted that the satellite separated, the Russian satellite separated, split in two like a Russian nesting doll, and purposely maneuvered very close to threaten the American satellite. That's extraordinarily intimidatory behavior by the Russians.
You're exactly right, Ross, and it is something, again, that's very troubling. And as we termed in our paper, it's menacing behavior, it's troubling behavior, it's irresponsible behavior. Certainly as spacefaring nations, none of us want to see collisions. None of us want to see the results or take the, if you will, a warfare or a conflict to space. No one benefits from those scenarios. And so it's very important that ultimately in the end that we find different paths to peace, that the actions that are taken in space have lasting consequences. And so we felt like, as part of AleraNova, the AleraNova Space Consultancy, General Hyten and I both feel very strongly that it's important that we highlight these kinds of issues and take these issues to the public and talk about the kinds of things that maybe others can't talk about, to make sure that we're highlighting these issues for the public at large, and that we're calling out irresponsible behavior when it occurs.
So one of the concerns you raise, and this is alarming, is that hackers, cyber hackers, probably state-sponsored cyber hackers, are regularly trying to hack into what's called the satellite control network. Can you tell me, please, what is the satellite control network and what does it do?
Well, that's a great question, Ross. The satellite control network is a series of about 7 different operational sites. There are 19 different antenna configurations all around the world. And it's to command and control and operate the satellite constellations that are being operated today. The satellite control network was first fielded back in the late 50s in response to be able to support the Corona program. And it has evolved over time since. But the purpose of General Hyten's and my article was to highlight the strategic vulnerability, if you will, the Achilles heel, that the satellite control network and its vulnerability, at its core, the vulnerability that it represents, and the need to be able to take decisive action to shore it up, to give it robustness, to give it resiliency, and to ultimately maintain the safety of operations. Not only for the satellites that it commands and controls, but the ability and the flexibility to take on the next generation of larger, if you will, platforms that are on orbit, larger numbers of satellites that are going to be on orbit.
General, reading between the lines in your article, it's quite obvious that the satellite control network is creaking at the seams. Is it your worry that it's extremely vulnerable to cybersecurity attacks?
Yes, and while I should first point out that I think that the United States Space Force does an outstanding job of maintaining vigilance and protecting those assets to the very, very best of their ability. But at the same time, I would also note that those systems and that network is constantly under attack. It's just important that we understand that there are bad actors out there who represent and understand the critical role that the satellite control network has, and that we be able to address the vulnerabilities that it might have either now or in the future and shore that system up to the very best it can be.
Now, I know I'm probably straying into areas you can't actually discuss publicly, but I'm going to put it to you anyway. I was talking to intelligence sources in DC, and I asked them about the satellite control network, and they said, look, if you are talking to a senior general from US Air Force, you should ask them about efforts hackers have made to actually move satellites in orbit. Has that happened? Have we had hackers trying to alter the position of our satellites?
I can't comment on any actions or impacts or whatnot ever that might have occurred with regard to mischievous intent of hackers. I would just again reaffirm that the network in and of itself is under constant attack every day, and it's critically important that we have the appropriate defenses in place. Not only that, but the modernization that it needs. The satellite control network has evolved over time, but it hasn't kept pace with the modern command and control architectures that are available not only commercially, but available through a lot of other different sources. And it's important, and the purpose of General Hyten's in my article was just to highlight that as not only a vulnerability, but an opportunity to right the ship, if you will. And make sure that we have the ability to command and control our large constellations in the future.
Do you know, sir, what Congressman Mike Turner, the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee, was talking about when he referred back in February to a briefing that he'd received about a disturbing new Russian anti-satellite weapon?
No. All I know is what has been reported in the news with regard to a Russian anti-satellite weapon. I only am familiar with what is in the news.
So one thing that I do know is that your colleague, and I'm very disappointed we can't get to talk to General Hyten, but back in 2021, when he was still in the job as the vice chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, he revealed that China had done a test of a hypersonic missile that showed that China might one day be able to launch a surprise nuclear attack on the United States. And what he described was China launched a long-range missile. It went round the world, dropped off a hypersonic glide vehicle that glided all the way back to China, hit a target in China. And I think there was a wry comment from the general when he was asked if the missile hit the target. He said, quote, "close enough." Now, presumably, launching a missile into space with a nuclear weapon on board, a hypothetical scenario, I admit, if China did put a nuclear weapon on board a missile and then launch it, a hypersonic missile from that ICBM towards the United States, obviously it's an act of war, but it's obviously a very clear breach of the Outer Space Treaty of 1967, isn't it?
It sure is. And again, it's just another example of troubling behavior, but yet aggressive actions on behalf of the PRC to be able to move forward and continue to threaten the United States and her allies. And it's a demonstration of power that is provoking in many ways. And so it's important, again, that we come together and we talk about this, that we call out misbehavior and irresponsible action as soon as it occurs, and try to find diplomatic ways to resolve these situations and not let them escalate. No one wants to see that happen. I am grateful for this opportunity, Ross, and your willingness to highlight these kinds of issues because they're important.
There's been speculation, though, back from the Russians that what they're being accused of, developing secret anti-satellite technology, is exactly what the US is doing behind the scenes in the black world. I mean, I think we'd be pretty naive, wouldn't we, to think that the US hasn't developed anti-satellite weaponry. We do know that, I think back in 1985, there was a test of an F-15 fighter firing a missile at a US satellite in orbit. So the US has tested anti-satellite technology before. What is the Russian government doing that the American government hasn't done? And don't we risk looking hypocritical?
Well, I think that, and to your point, Ross, I think that and I do wish General Hyten would have been able to join us, because he personally was involved and was in the program that tested that anti-satellite capability back in 1985 as a young officer. And he will tell you our behavior since then has been very transparent with regard to the test, its intentions, and what we learned about that. About that technology. And I don't think it's being hypocritical at all, because other nations saw that test and we published the results of those tests and have never done it again. But since then, other nations are continue to demonstrate those kinds of capability. And I just, this many years later, it has all the appearance of a threatening and hostile act.
Can I ask you this, sir? There was speculation only back in April by a former very senior national security official, Dr. Harold Malmgren, who's worked in various administrations at different times on nuclear weapons technology. And he wrote a tweet not too long back where he actually speculated that the United States and other nations may have directed energy weapons. Now, can you comment? Does the US have secret DEW weaponry, and is any of that positioned on satellites in space?
No, I can't comment with regard to US force capabilities, Ross. I'm sure you can, and your viewers can understand why. But with regard to the capabilities that we have, it's very important that we have a full range and a full complement of capabilities to deal with any adversarial actions as they might unfold.
If we did have directed energy weapons in space, would that be a breach of the Outer Space Treaty?
Again, I can't comment with regard to what we do. I know that the United States has been very diligent in complying with its treaty obligations.
Right. So one of the other things that when I was doing my research was pointed out to me, there was some indignance from commentators that there might be a position taken by the US that it's wrong for nations to test anti-satellite weaponry, because the grim reality, isn't it, is that if we do end up having a nuclear confrontation, a thermonuclear war, isn't the most easy way of knocking out a potential adversary's ICBMs to use an electromagnetic pulse weapon in orbit? And hasn't the US tested such a weapon right back to the 1950s, eventuating in the Starfish Prime tests that took place out of Johnson Atoll in the 1960s?
Well, again, Ross, with regard to U.S. compliance with its own treaties, I think we have a superb record. I wasn't even born in the 1950s, so going back that far. But I would tell you that the U.S. takes its treaty obligations very seriously and has promoted the peaceful use of space for decades. And it's a responsibility of all spacefaring nations to do the same.
But can I just pin you down for a moment? I mean, what can we do if an adversary in a nuclear confrontation decides to use nuclear weapons in space? We can't do anything, can we, with our satellite control network, even if we do upgrade it and modernize it? What can we do to defend against the risk of an electromagnetic pulse? Because I've done a bit of research, and there are declassified files that show what came out of the tests that were done in the 1960s. And what they revealed was the thermomechanical spull. X-rays produced by high-altitude nuclear detonations create an internal shockwave. And in the case of thermonuclear weapons, if you've got an ICBM in orbit coming towards the United States or going towards Russia, God forbid, these shockwaves can be used to destroy the plutonium pit the actual internal part of the bomb, and caused literally a degradation of the weapon that might actually stop it from blowing up as big as it would have blown up, or actually stop it from blowing up at all. I mean, the temptation must be enormous in the event of a confrontation. Isn't the bigger risk for humanity that our entire electronics network would be obliterated in the event of a nuclear confrontation of any kind, because the first defensive act would be to deploy an electromagnetic pulse weapon against any kind of incoming missile?
Certainly, the use of EMP weapons is one possibility, but in that kind of scenario that is elevated to that level of severity, no one wants to imagine, although we must think about those kinds of scenarios and plan accordingly through the full spectrum of conflict. But I would tell you, outside of those satellites and systems that might be hardened to protect themselves in the case of an EMP-like attack, and there are some that have some degree of testing that would be associated with that, i.e., survival of the nation kinds of capabilities. Those are all very, very important, but the vast majority of the systems on orbit today, the satellites and platforms on orbit today, are not hardened to that degree. And so many of them and much of our network and capacity would, as you said, be obliterated or be taken down and be inoperable for days and weeks at a time. But that, again, is part of the challenge, that as we look at what the satellite control network is today and where we want to take it in the future, it's important that we have primary and redundant systems that allow us to continue to operate through the full spectrum of conflict.
Can I just talk about possibilities, though, sir? Because, I mean, as I read your paper and then started researching, I became increasingly alarmed at the fact that there are now non-state actors, rogues like the Houthi rebels, for example, that appear to be gaining access to ballistic missiles provided to them by the Iranians. Is it outside the realm of possibility that you could even get a rogue state actor or non-state actor that uses ballistic missile technology to knock out, say, GPS targeting system satellites in orbit? Is that technology now available even to potentially a lowly terrorist group or a rebel group?
Ross, you're asking a great question that ultimately I think would have to be responsibly asked and managed by the intelligence assessment and the intelligence community with regard to the capabilities of non-state actors. But in today's rapidly advancing world and rapidly changing threat environment, it is critical that we fully understand and appreciate all of the full range of threats that might be there. Someone who is willing and apt to take a cheap shot, and that's what it would be. To be able to score points and or make a statement. All of that is at play as our nation tries to come to grips with the increasing threat environment. It just underscores the point again as to why we must look at, if you will, all these systems, to include the satellite control network as a piece of critical infrastructure for the United States. And in protection of obviously the United States homeland, but our allies around the world. And making sure that we're able to secure its operation for now and in the future.
These are very dangerous times right now, aren't they, General? I mean, do you find yourself wondering why there's not more commentary in the public arena about the dangers that we face at the moment? I'm amazed how close we came just even a few weeks ago to the possibility of an all-out conflagration in the Middle East. As somebody who's been on the inside the Pentagon, inside the US Air Force, you've seen the capabilities of our nuclear weapons. Does it make you lose sleep at night thinking about the possibilities?
Ross, I think it's an excellent question that you ask, and it's something that's core to why we believe Nova, the space consultancy, has a critical role to play here. To be able to have the occasional thought leadership piece, the occasional op-ed, the ability to talk openly and freely in public about these kinds of issues, because we can sometimes say things that other people can't say or discuss issues and bring to light situations that maybe the public is not tracking. And it's really, really important that the public be continually aware and educated on the rising threat environment and just how unstable the world is becoming very, very rapidly. Look all around the world, whether it's the threat in Taiwan, or whether it's North Korea, or whether it's the Middle East and what's going on there today, or the Russian war that continues to go on in the Ukraine. I mean, there are fires everywhere. And that's not to even get to the non-state actor threat that you just discussed. So we feel it's important at Alaranova to be able to talk about that, to talk about space security and national security as important topics that, again, the average person in public can understand and appreciate, and hopefully raise awareness of, to support the kinds of budgets and investments that are going to be needed to take care of these rising threats.
Is it your concern, General, that we're looking at a possibility that the Russians may well abandon the Outer Space Treaty and publicly admit that they are deploying weapons in space?
I hope not. I hope that's not the case at all. I hope that the Russians will continue. They've been responsible partners. We've had an outstanding partnership with them for many decades on the International Space Station, as an example, and in other forms of treaty compliance and verification. And I hope that their intention, as they blew up one of their own satellites just a couple of years ago, that they would reconsider their future actions, them and the Chinese. And I hope that they come to the realization that polluting the space environment with the debris that you described earlier is a lose-lose proposition for every spacefaring nation.
What can we do, though, sir, if they do decide to essentially militarize space?
Well, again, we must be able to, the United States has got to closely, and our allies have got to be able to closely monitor and assess and understand the threat and understand any provocative action and its intention, and then take appropriate steps and respond accordingly. It's really irresponsible to try to speculate on the kinds of steps or what we might do in any given scenario. Really, we won't know until the scenario presents itself, and then the responsible leadership will make the appropriate decision.
It's a shame, sir, that you don't know about the 1960s starfish prime tests, because I'm fascinated by them, because that one of the allegations that I've been investigating, because we do have an ongoing interest, as you may well know, in the subject of UAPs, UFOs. And I've been researching allegations that have been put to me by researchers that there were objects seen around the tests that America did with nuclear weapons around Johnson Atoll and the Marshall Islands in the 1960s and the 1970s. Where do you stand, sir, on the UAP issue? Do you have a view about whether there is a genuine, authentic mystery relating to unidentified anomalous phenomena?
No, I personally don't have a position on that, Ross. I read with interest, and I'm sure as you have, and you've had previous broadcasts on this, I watch and read with interest, but I do not have a personal view on unidentified aerial phenomenon.
As a US Air Force senior officer yourself in the past, was it ever an issue that came up in your brief that there were UAPs that were causing issues for flight safety or national security concerns?
None within my responsibilities, Ross.
Right. Well, General, thank you so much, sir, for speaking to Reality Check. I hope that what we're talking about today remains theoretical and that we don't see the deployment of nuclear weapons in space. But is that your biggest concern? That unless there's a very clear statement of intent and a commitment to rebuilding the satellite control network by the US government, we might find ourselves in a position where we're not able to control the outcome if there is an escalation in space.
Ross, I'm grateful for the opportunity to meet with you today and discuss these important issues. issues like the satellite control network are near and dear to our heart. They are part of the very fabric of the satellite constellations and the freedoms, frankly, that we enjoy around the world for the United States and our allies. And it's important that we come together and we talk about this, subjects like this. It's certainly incumbent upon and responsible for nations like Russia and China to have responsible actions and activities in space. I'm hopeful that they will continue to do so, and we'll have a strong partnership. But again, knowing the kind of vulnerabilities that exist in systems like the satellite control network, it's important that we modernize them, and it's important that they have resiliency and the capability that we're going to need to operate them for decades to come. So again, thank you so much for having me today.
It's a real pleasure, sir. Thank you for speaking to Reality Check.
Thank you. Take care.
So before we go this week, I'd like to answer a few of the questions from my Ask Me Anything on Reddit that I did this week on the Are UFOs site. And there were so many people trying to ask me questions, we couldn't do all of them. So I can answer a few more here if you like. The first one from Gobble Gobble is, given that the phenomenon is global, why is everything seemingly being held back by US security clearances? Is this indicative of a private international agreement in place? And if so, what is the enforcement mechanism? Great question. I have no idea. Certainly, the US seems to be cracking the whip on other countries in terms of controlling the narrative on UFOs. I know from friends of mine who work in the Australian government that there is information sharing among the Five Eyes nations, UK, USA, Canada, Australia and New Zealand. And there is sharing on UAPs. And as we've seen from reports in Canada, there's also a thing called the Foreign Material Exploitation Program, which traditionally has been used for the recovery of Cold War era, mainly Soviet or Chinese technology, so that it can be studied and replicated and reverse engineered by the Americans. But allegedly, that Foreign Material Exploitation Program is also being used by the Americans for the purposes of gathering exotic technology, i.e. non-human intelligence technology, if you believe such nonsense, of course. The next question is from Elder Priceless. Ross, a saying you often use is, I know for a fact you're under no NDA, nor subject to any Official Secrets Act equivalent that I'm aware of. Why don't you just plainly state some things that you know for a fact? This would exclude, obviously, items that you know to be state security risks or would lead to source disclosure. Coming from you, they'd constitute soft disclosure, lessening the inevitable ontological shock we're told we inevitably have to experience. Well, the simple fact is, most journalists, if they were really honest with you, they would never say they know for an absolute fact. And if you listen to the way I talk, I'm often very, very cautious. I say that a journalist is only ever as good as the sources they speak to. I haven't seen, and I'm at pains to emphasise, I haven't seen any evidence of the phenomenon firsthand. I haven't seen a UFO. I haven't seen any kind of non-human intelligence. I've had moments where I've thought I might be, but to be honest with you, I'm just not sure. And so I am very cautious. I'm paid to be cautious, because the moment I say I know something for a fact, I'll almost certainly be wrong. This is a very vexing and mysterious subject. It's extraordinarily complex, and it's very, very hard to say anything categorically. I'm still on a learning curve, so stick with me, and we'll find it out together. Ecstatic Process 999 says, I'm one of those people who becomes interested in the subject when tangible evidence from credible sources becomes available. Duh. It feels like, since the release of the Navy videos, that's been very thin on the ground. What do you say to someone like me who wants to know the truth but is ready to disengage now as what I'm seeing two acts and feels like a lot of a quasi-religious cult that makes a lot of promises and never delivers? Yeah, maybe you should just go and do your own thing, mate. I actually think that there is quite a substantial body of evidence that has emerged, and what you have to understand are the subtleties. No government is ever going to make an overt disclosure in the current climate. All it's going to do is do its level best, I suspect, at the moment, to try and suppress it. I think disclosure is going to come from private initiative, private research initiatives. And I can tell you that's happening. I mean, Bob Bigelow's NIDS, National Institute of Discovery Science, was very much part of that. Even the BASS project, which became the ORSAP project funded by the DIA, they were run out of Bigelow. And good on Robert Bigelow for having the courage and the gumption to actually fund that research a lot himself. So, yeah, I mean, bottom line is we're not happy, none of us, with the level of evidence that's coming out. I would love to see more credible evidence, and there's a lot that I do know of that behind the scenes suggests that there's a hell of a lot more to come. You're just going to have to be patient. And tough titty, frankly, if you're complaining about it. Naro Joe says, what more can you share about the blue beings? Not a lot. I've talked about that in my AMA on Reddit, and everything I've said is there. Mr. Coulthart, do you have any information about what the object was that was shot down last year over Alaska? And that's from Silv3R Bull 8. I have done a story. If you go back through the archives of my work with NewsNation, you will see that we did a story, we've aired a story about the Alaska UFO, and in fact Christopher Mellon, the former Deputy Undersecretary of Defence, talked quite interestingly about the fact that he was aware of what I was aware of, which is that a few days prior to the Alaska shoot down, there was not a scramble, that was a very deliberate term by the US Air Force, there was a diversion of aircraft from an existing exercise near the Arctic Circle to go and investigate anomalous objects, 8 or 9 anomalous objects that were picked up on early warning radar. And as the jets approached, those objects flitted off at extraordinarily high speed. On the Alaska UFO that happened a few days later, all I can tell you is I am told it was anomalous. And I'm told there's been a cover-up. And I'm told that certain politicians in the Congress have been briefed about this. But yet again, we just have to wait for candour and openness. I mean, it's frustrating. I share everyone's frustration that what's happening at the moment is there is an information clamp being applied. Not a great deal I can do about that, I'm afraid. It's up to you guys back home to let your congressional representatives know that this matters. Let them know that you want truth and transparency. Don't put up with being snowed. OK Vanilla 931 says, is there a common idea or belief of what the phenomenon is when you speak to individuals in the government, intelligence officials and experiences? Yes, it's non-human. That's the best I can give you. I think part of the problem is we're often talking about a lot of different things. I don't think all UAP phenomena is the same thing. I don't think all of it is, for example, future human or interdimensional. I wouldn't be surprised at all if some of it was from somewhere else in our galaxy or our universe. But I think we have to contemplate the probability that this planet has been visited by NHI, non-human intelligences, for millennia. And we are slowly becoming aware of them. So, look, really, I don't have that much more to offer this week. That's all the extra AMA questions. I can tell you we will be back with another reality check, digging into more intriguing mysteries very soon. Thank you. Thanks for watching. Go to joinnn.com to find NewsNation on your television provider. And please don't forget to click that red subscribe button to ensure you get more of NewsNation's unbiased and fact-driven news coverage.